got the cornfield calm, Midwest tone, but he's spitting facts like a dog with a bone. Lanky frame, fire-haired, eyes on the case, breaking down the game in the darkest place. Sports scores to murder boards, Hoosier logic cuts like swords. From Friday lights to chalked out lines, this redhead's brain rewrites the lines inside the Hoosier mind, where the stories twist and stats unwind. He's a legend in flannel, mic in hand, digging deep where few can stand. From touchdowns to crime scenes raw, he's got the truth in every draw. Yeah, step in if you dare to find what's brewing inside the Hoosier mind. He'll talk Pacers, Colts, or Colts on trial. Hoosier humor with a devilish smile. He's that redhead sleuth with a box of clues, takes your headline, breaks the news. With every stat and every scream, he's painting portraits in your stream. Don't blink, he'll tie it tight, from game night wins to murder flight. Inside the Hoosier mind, where the facts hit hard and the lines are blind. He's a ginger ninja, smooth and slick, cracking cases play by play quick. From courtrooms to the hardwood floor, he digs for more than just the score. Tune in and don't rewind, you're deep now inside the Hoosier mind.
What's up, all? Welcome into Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you by Military Broadcast Radio, hoping to give veterans a voice. I am back after the week before I had to study for a math exam that I ended up doing awful on. Not a big math fan. And last week I had no Wi-Fi for like 3 days, so that was also super annoying. But nonetheless, we are back, though. A little bit of an update as far as the whole Lane Kiffin situation goes with LSU. And then we've also got a little bit of an update as far as James Franklin now being the head coach of Virginia Tech. And then hopefully Mike is also unfortunately having some technical issues with his computer. Hopefully he'll be able to join me. We'll do part 2 of our quarterback room grading situations that we decided to do. It's going to be a 4-part series. We tried to do it back to back as far as middle of the season goes for each conference, NFC and AFC, what we think their quarterback rooms are and what we're going to get their grades. So hopefully that'll be in the second part of the show. But nonetheless, let's get into the college football part. Let's get into James Franklin getting his contract with Virginia Tech and being the new head coach of the Hokies, as well as the potential Lane Kiffin move and where he's going to go if he leaves at all and everything that's tied into it. So let's just dive right in. So James Franklin signed with Virginia Tech to become the new head coach of the Hokies. And with that, they, for whatever reason, came out with a massive amount of money for James Franklin, which is really surprising. They ended up going from kind of, I would say, middle of the pack ACC spending wise for their coaching staff, for their money, all of that, all the way to one of the top teams in the ACC when it comes to just financial spending. So Pete Thamel of ESPN released the details. It's a 5-year contract, and it's good news for both the coaches that are looking to join as well as James Franklin himself. He's set to make an average of about $8.2 million per year, double what the staff salary was last year for previous coach Brent Pry. And then to boot on top of it, the deal is a fully guaranteed total of $41 million, a guaranteed total of $41 million, which combined with his $8.2 million means a real close total of $50 million when you also include the money from the Penn State reported buyout negotiations to boot on top of it. And that is crazy that they were willing to do that and that they're trying to make Virginia Tech into a true contender into the ACC. Now, I know some people are not exactly a huge fan of James Franklin making this move, and I also know a lot of Virginia Tech fans are a huge fan of it because now they have a coach that can build a winning culture. Here's how I see this truly from both sides. I do think for Virginia Tech, you got a solid coach. You have a coach that is proven. He did great with both Vanderbilt and with Penn State both. With Vandy, he went 39-24. He went 24-15 out of 39 games. For Penn State, he went 104-45 at his time there. Now, obviously, the big thing that hurts him more than anything when it comes to being a head coach, he's 4-21 as a head coach when it comes to top 10 teams. And that is unfortunate. This is the argument that I would make for James Franklin, the same one that I made for Ryan Day with Ohio State, because there's a little bit of that stretch there. Oh, Ohio State can't face anybody. They can't beat the big teams. They weren't able to beat Michigan when they were one of the top 5 ranked teams all those years. They weren't able to beat Georgia. For the most part, they kept it close against almost every single one of those teams and almost every single one of those games. They kept it close. Now, again, that doesn't necessarily equate to wins. Close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. So I will 100% give them credit where credit is due with that. But it does mean something in football. And that does count. Now, for James Franklin, part of the problem, he has always been able to recruit well. Penn State always had great athletes. They've always had great players. You look at Tyler Warren, you look just on the defensive side of the ball, you have Micah Parsons, you have Abdul Carter, you have Joey Porter Jr. Again, on the offensive side of the ball, you have guys like Chris Godwin, you've got Saquon Barkley. The biggest question to me that I always had was the quarterback situation, because Penn State quarterbacks went into the NFL, but none of them were really starters. There was no quarterback out of Penn State really taken in the first round or even really the second round. They were typically about third and beyond, and they were typically just, journeyman backups. Some of them I don't even know if are still in the league or not, as well as you have running backs like Miles Sanders, who ended up taking over for Saquon after. Ended up being pretty lucrative, had a couple pretty good deals and a couple pretty good stints, with Philly, with Carolina, with Dallas. So he's able to coach really well, and he's able to get the best out of his players. But it is difficult when you're in a top-heavy conference. It was difficult for him at Penn State because you were going to have to deal with Ohio State, who has been a contender for an extremely long time, both in the Big Ten and on the national level. You have Michigan, who prior to Jim Harbaugh, and even for a majority of Jim Harbaugh's time, started to really make that ascension back into the national title. Big Ten wise, they were always pretty close to the top. They would usually struggle against Ohio State. In the Mark D'Antonio era, they would struggle against Michigan State as well. So you're always having to compete with them just as those top two as far as the Big Ten goes. So that's what you have to deal with on that side, as well as really the Big Ten as a whole. Each team kind of has its own specialty of things. You look at Iowa. If you face Iowa, you're going to have to deal with a tough defense. You're going to have to deal with Kinnick Stadium. You're going to have to deal with Kirk Ferentz, and as good as a coach as he is, you look at somewhere like Michigan State, kind of one of those teams always surprises you, does a little bit better than what they're supposed to. Wisconsin historically used to always do well, especially in the Paul Chryst era and whatnot. So all of these teams, it's hard to compete with. And then you bring in the former Pac-12 teams of Washington, Oregon, USC, and UCLA. USC, known for high-powered offense with Lincoln Riley, obviously has showed off pretty well. Defense is where they tend to struggle. Penn State struggled against them last year. They struggled against them this year as well as they obviously fell to UCLA. They struggle against a powerhouse that is Oregon. Dan Letting is another one of those coaches, has done great, inherited a great team, has kept it continuously going, recruits really well, has great offense and great defenses to boot. And Washington, while a little bit in a rebuild, Jed Fish has done really well as far as bringing that program back to prominence and getting that rebuilt, basically past that rebuilt pretty quickly as far as making them a little bit more respectable and making them more of contenders in the Big Ten and making it more difficult for them to face. So now, if you're James Franklin and you're Penn State, it's gotten even harder to win the Big Ten. So I give him a little bit of a pass for that, because you've got at least 5 to 6 teams that you truly have to contend with, that it's a battle with every single week. Now, on the other side of this, because I'll probably hear this quite a bit, the SEC has the same thing. Now, the SEC and SEC fans, and I say this as a fan of an SEC team, there tends to be a lot of bias, and there tends to be the argument made with a lot of the SEC teams of, well, we're just so good that we beat the snot out of each other. And for a long time, I used to hear that if you took the bad teams out of the SEC and put them in a conference like the ACC, you put them in a conference like the Big Ten, or at the time the Pac-12 or the Big 12, that even the bad teams in the SEC would roll all over these conferences with no problem because they got beat the best by the best in the SEC, which again, I always thought was weird. Just because Bama can hang 50 on you as Vanderbilt or Kentucky does not necessarily mean that if you go into the Big Ten, you're going to be able to roll over all of the Big Ten teams just because you got beat by 50 by Alabama as compared to, I don't know, like, Ohio State beat, let's say, Northwestern by 30. Like that to me, that is such a bad comparison. And one of the arguments, obviously, with the whole Texas A&M and South Carolina ordeal just a couple of weeks ago was Texas A&M was down 33 at halftime. Now they made the comeback. Shout out to the Aggies for being able to do that. But one of the arguments and defenses was, well, look how deep the SEC is. You're not wrong. The SEC does pride itself, and the SEC historically has been very deep with talent and is still very deep with talent, full transparency. With NIL, that has made the playing field more even for a lot of the Big Ten teams. And it's made it more open for Big Ten teams to pay for the talent rather than all of it being congregated into one conference, and that one conference therefore dominating for almost 2 decades as a result. So back to James Franklin, though. He joins Virginia Tech, and they're in the ACC. He has the benefit of the ACC is not as top heavy as the Big Ten or the SEC is. And I know for a lot of people, you could argue one of your biggest contenders you're going to have to deal with as James Franklin. You're going to have to deal with, as barring anything crazy happening in the offseason, you're going to have to deal with Dabo Swinney and the Clemson Tigers, because they have almost always been a contention and always been a contender since Dabo has been there. You have kind of the one-off years with Florida State, another big brand, probably one of the other biggest brands in the ACC. You have to potentially contend with them, although they're in kind of a hot and cold era right now as it is. You have to deal with Miami, Miami is always talented. Miami always starts out hot, and for whatever reason, they crumble about this time of year. They crumbled against Louisville, who ended up being pretty solid, looked pretty solid there for a little bit, and that unfortunately fell apart for Louisville. But Miami seems to struggle. You're going to have to deal with them. As far as a fourth, if I had to pick another team that maybe makes the ACC a little top heavy, you could maybe argue UNC. They're kind of up and down. NC State is kind of more of the, if the ACC, if you have a middle team, NC State's like just above the middle. They're not in the top, but they're not exactly in the middle. They're in the middle of the middle and the top. So NC State could always make noise. You've got Georgia Tech, who's been able to make noise the last couple of years, and a lot of that I think is just due to Haynes King. But I also think a lot of people are starting to figure Georgia Tech out, as Georgia Tech has really struggled. They just got blown out by Pitt. You have Pitt that you have to contend with and whatnot. So it's a little bit more even playing field, but there's still only a couple, if not really just one heavy hitter contending team in the ACC that you have to deal with, and that's Clemson if you're James Franklin and Virginia Tech. So I think the potential for him to be successful and make Virginia Tech a successful team is truly there. Now, the biggest question for me, and probably the biggest question for a lot of football fans and probably even a lot of Hokie fans, is cool, you can get here, you have a little bit of an easier path, but can you still win those big games? Can you win the big game against Clemson when that time comes? And then, of course, the other big question of, if you do, and if you're able to get Virginia Tech to that point, can you get the team past, say, the first and maybe even the second round of the college football playoffs if you do? So that's the other big question that is going to have to be there, is now you have an opportunity to win the big games again. And if anything, your pathway got a little bit easier, but once you get into the playoffs, that pathway can potentially derail you pretty quickly. Now, last year, he was just he was one game away from being in a national title game. And I made a lot of the arguments. They had probably one of the easiest pathways to there, because they had to face SMU and they had to face Boise State. SMU also in the ACC, maybe a little bit of a contender compared to that Penn State team and what they had with Tyler Warren, with Drew Aller, with Abdul Carter still on the defense, with all of that. not as much of a contender. But that's still a team that SMU has honestly looked good this year, and they're obviously adjusting to be in the ACC pretty well. So he's going to have some struggles, but I do think for Virginia Tech overall, it is a positive thing. It is a benefit for them, and I think for them it gives a program that really was popular back in like the early 2000s, like the Michael Vick days and whatnot. So there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of upside for it. I'm excited to see what he can do for Virginia Tech. I'm excited to see what he can do for college football as a whole. But again, I do have a lot of questions as far as what does that look like with him still playing in the big games, because then that will truly answer the question, is it James Franklin as a coach or is it his players? Because he got a big win against Georgia when he was at Vandy. It's one of his few ranked wins that he got. I think that was in 2013, if I remember correctly. He got a big win against Ohio State in 2016. That's actually what ended up getting them the Big Ten title that year, his only conference title that he's won. But they didn't go to the playoffs that year, unfortunately. So we'll have to see how it goes. I'm excited to see what James Franklin can do as a whole. But again, we'll just have to see. We'll have to see what it looks like here in just a few months when college football will kick off again, as we unfortunately are coming to the end of the college football season. But I'm going to take one real quick commercial break to talk about the VA and the radio outreach that they have. And then when we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more about the whole Lane Kiffin situation, when we might potentially have an update, and some of the facts that are out there when we come back.
Department of Veterans Affairs. For PSAs on the best services available to veterans, go to VA's new radio outreach page, news.va.gov/outreach/radio.
All right, we are back all. Welcome back to Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice. We are back to continue to talk more about the college football season and the college football landscape as a whole, as James Franklin has signed with the Virginia Tech Hokies to become their new head coach. And then we also have a potential update with Lane Kiffin and where he's going to potentially go as a head coach. If he's going to go to Florida, if he's going to go to LSU, or is he going to stay at Ole Miss? Honestly, the possibilities are endless. He has connections to just about everywhere. And I think for Lane, being in this position of being probably one of the most sought after head coaches in college football as it stands right now, if I'm him, I'm entertaining it. I'm entertaining all of the offers. I want to see, what can I get? What does my value look like? And who's willing to potentially pay me for it? As well as, if you're a head coach like this, and again, don't get it twisted, he has done great with Ole Miss. Ole Miss has been fantastic since he's been there. They've been to multiple 10-win seasons now. Now, the thing that kind of goes against him, he has not been to an SEC title game as a head coach. He has an assistant, but he is not as an actual head coach. He hasn't been to the playoffs. Now, that will more than likely change this year, barring some type of meltdown in the Egg Bowl against Mississippi State, which we'll find out the true update potentially by then, barring any type of major leaks and whatnot. But all of that being said, it will be interesting to see what his decision is. So as far as any type of monetary deals that are out there as it stands right now, so the current offer from LSU that is on the table is a $90 million offer for him to become the head coach. Now, from what I've heard in the rumors, that could potentially even be up to over $100 million in different incentive offers and whatnot. It would pay him yearly. Trying to find the math here. If I remember right, it would pay him about $12 to $15 million a year, which is about $4 to $5 million more than what they were paying Brian Kelly. On top of, there would be an additional $25 million per season to go towards the roster and NIL money. And that's just from LSU. I don't know if that would be, I don't know if that's an offer that Florida is willing to match. I don't know if that's an offer that Ole Miss is willing to match. Ole Miss is currently paying him right now, as it stands, $9 million a year. And it is kind of weird. And there's all these speculations that people have made throughout the weeks and whatnot, ever since Billy Napier was fired from Florida, and then ever since Brian Kelly was fired from LSU. Those have been the two schools that have made the most noise as far as wanting Lane Kiffin to be their head coach. Here's where a lot of people are saying that they think that he might leave Ole Miss, because he hasn't come out and said, I'm saying. He hasn't accepted a deal from Ole Miss. Now, a lot of the reports and rumors out there was that Ole Miss put an offer out on the table for him, a very lucrative offer, but he hasn't accepted. There was supposedly a rumor out there. He even came on Pat McAfee's show and said that there is no ultimatum, that he does not have to have a decision by the Egg Bowl. Now, and this is from Lane Kiffin. I don't know how true that really is, because if I'm Ole Miss, I want to know why you haven't accepted yet. If I'm Ole Miss, and I just want to know why, as well as if I'm Ole Miss and I think that there's an opportunity for my head coach to leave, and then I have to start the search. I want to know as soon as possible so that I can jump on the ball and get the ball rolling as far as who's going to replace you here at Ole Miss. So that's one thing that a lot of people are, suspect about with, is Lane Kiffin going to go? Is he not going to go? The other thing, they've seen him be flown out to Baton Rouge and given a tour of the facilities, given a tour of the city as a whole. Supposedly he has property out there now. Supposedly he bought a house. I don't know how necessarily true that is. I haven't seen any reports on that. Not doubting the validity of it, but I haven't personally seen anything of it. And then of course everybody makes the memes of, oh, well, he was eating an orange. It's a Florida orange. He's got to be going to Florida. So all of those rumors are out there, and they're absolutely hilarious. But that's a huge question to me, is you haven't signed with the school that you're with currently, which is still technically on the table. There's nothing that says he is for sure going to leave Ole Miss. The reports are supposedly in the locker room, players aren't happy with him because he's going to potentially be moving on. And then, of course, there's a picture of his son out there. His son, who also plays football, is wearing LSU headphones. Again, I don't know how why or how people go into that much of a deep reach to try to get them to think that, oh, well, this is definitely going to be the sign of where he's going to go. I get it, but also it's a really big reach if that's what you're trying to do. But nonetheless, though, let's talk about Lane Kiffin as a whole and his overall coaching career of what he's been able to do. So, his first head coaching gig that he got, he was head coach of the Raiders from 2007 to 2008. He went 5-15 and ended up getting fired in the middle of the season. He also ended up becoming the head coach of USC, and of course the infamous being left on the tarmac. He was technically head coach of the Tennessee Volunteers in between the Raiders and USC stint. Only went 7-6, didn't do super well. Then went to Florida Atlantic, was the head coach, and then ultimately ended up getting signed with Ole Miss and being the head coach there since 2020. And his record there has been great. Now, 2020, they went 5-5. Then they went 10-3, 8-5, 11-2, 10-3, and then 10-1. And this is 10-1 with a team that realistically I thought was going to do a significantly amount worse because of all the talent that they lost. They lost their quarterback in Jackson Dart. They lost all the talent on that defensive line. And he's shown that he can absolutely retool and continue to go, which is probably what makes him one of the hottest commodities as it stands right now in college football, especially in the modern day college football landscape anyway. So that's the good news with it. The bad news, like I said, he has not been to a conference title as a head coach. He hasn't done it he didn't do it with Ole Miss. He didn't do it with Tennessee. He didn't do it with USC. Now, obviously, things have changed a lot since that time when he was at USC, Tennessee, and all of that. And it's obviously changed a lot since he's just been at Ole Miss. He's gotten better since things have changed. But that does leave a lot of questions as to, why can't you get to that next step? Like, what is truly holding you back? Because obviously you've got the money, you've got the ability to pay, you've got the ability to recruit very well. So what is stopping you from being able to take that next step forward? Now, that could also beg the question, is it just because it's Ole Miss? Is it because historically the program, it's not a very historical winning program? It's not one of those programs that people think, oh, if you go to Ole Miss, they've got all these great players, they have a huge tradition of winning. That's something that's just been recently built with Ole Miss. Now, they've had it in the past where they had fairly successful seasons, but really Ole Miss hasn't come back on the map since Lane Kiffin really took over and really started that run with them. And if he goes to somewhere like LSU in Florida, can he potentially take that next step forward? Because with both rosters right now, you're going to have a lot of turnover because LSU went heavy in the transfer portal. So a lot of these guys are probably going to leave because they're graduating, because they're moving on, whatever the case may be. Florida, a lot of the same thing. And so trying to keep that roster intact, also trying to build a core foundation, trying to build a culture back for both of these teams, because BK and Billy Napier both recruited really well. If Lane if he goes to either one and he stays and he can get all of those players to stay on top of whoever he gets to transfer in, whoever he's able to recruit and whatnot, it could be a quick turnaround. But were you truly limited and handicapped with Ole Miss as compared to, do you think you'll have more freedom, and with more freedom, you'll be able to do better with Ole Miss and with LSU as compared to maybe before? I don't know, but we'll definitely see. There was another thing that was brought up with this that I feel is probably one of the most interesting, is you have a guy like Lane Kiffin and you're willing to throw all of this money towards him. Like I said, LSU almost $100 million just in, throwing money at him, and then 20 to 25 million of roster money to play with, which is great. But my question to that would be then, why would you not try to get a coach that is solid, right? Like an actual good coach. Don't just go get some run-of-the-mill guy, because obviously if you looked at somebody like Brian Kelly, who is a successful coach and can recruit and had a lot of the opportunities afforded to him that that Lane Kiffin will have, then there is the question of, they have to be a better coach than Brian Kelly was. And that's no offense to Brian Kelly, but he had Jaden Daniels, you had Malik Neighbors, and you had Brian Thomas Jr., and you didn't make the playoffs with them. Like that's nuts. Now, albeit that defense was atrocious to boot, but nonetheless, it does make you question Brian Kelly's ability to coach. So if you're LSU, do you want to pay all this money to get Lane and only have a limited amount of funds for NIL after? Or the question was brought up of, why not do a semi-decent coach, and then you give him a quote-unquote war chest, all but unlimited fund of money to be able to pay for some of the top-notch guys in the transfer portal, to be able to pay a lot of these top recruits to come to your school, and then you can make a deep run. Probably one of the best examples of this as it stands currently right now is Texas Tech. They're 10-1. They have an opportunity. If they win this coming weekend, they will go to the Big 12 championship. They'll compete for the Big 12, and then they could potentially make a deep run for the play in the college football playoffs. And if you look at their offensive and defensive line as compared to a couple years ago, it's night and day difference, because they spent a ton of money in the transfer portal, in NIL, to be able to get to this point. And realistically, that's not a bad option. Like, they don't have the greatest coach ever, But if he can coach just well enough and make it to where, okay, all these guys work, I have a good enough coordinators to make it work as far as the offensive defensive side goes. There's going to be some struggles. They're not going to be perfect type of thing. They could make an extremely deep run. And I think for LSU or Florida, either one, or even Ole Miss, if he ends up staying, I would really take that into consideration. I would potentially take into consideration, who can we find that is a proven coach, maybe hasn't, gone to the big dance, maybe hasn't won a championship or anything crazy like that, but has proven he can coach, and then give him an unlimited amount of money to boot as far as being able to build his roster and whatnot goes. Now, obviously it's a business. The coaches don't always do the direct negotiations. It's almost always through their agents, and the agents are going to get their clients the most amount of money they can, because you never know when this is going to be your last job, and you're going to try to set yourself up for as long as possible. 100% understand it, 100% get it. As a fan, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I get it from a business aspect, because at the end of the day, that's their client. That's what they're paid to do. And they get a commission for however much money that their client gets. They get a little bit of a commission to that. So that's my thoughts and feelings on it. I think for everything that's happening with it, I'm trying to think of how I want to put this. I think it is going to change college football as a whole. It's going to make pretty much the entire offseason extremely interesting, because we should find out by Saturday, after the Egg Bowl against Mississippi State, what Lane Kiffin's decision is going to be. And I'm going to be 100% honest. I think it might even be longer after that, because if I'm Lane and you've gotten Ole Miss into the playoffs, because again, barring any type of a meltdown upset against Mississippi State, you're going to go into the playoffs, is if he decides to leave and just leaves right then, or even if he doesn't leave right then, for your players, then the argument goes, okay, well, why are we still doing this here? Why are we still trying to do a run here? Now, from a competitor and an athlete, because that's what all these young men are, they're competitors. They want to be the best. And if they have an opportunity to win a championship, I know they want to. For them, I don't think that they'll allow themselves to do that. But in the back of their mind, that's going to be there of, well, if coach isn't going to be here, then what does this really matter? Like, what are we really doing this for? And I know it's not as old school college football as that anymore, because there's guys are loyal, but overall they're building their own brand as young athletes, as young students, as young men. That's what they're doing. They're building their brand for the future, for, either other collegiate opportunities, potentially opportunities in the NFL, even opportunities outside of the NFL. That's what they're building up for. So I get it with, some of these athletes may not be as tied to the coach as before. But I don't see Lane being the type of guy that, if you're this close now, just walking away from that, especially because, again, that question is always going to be there of, if you didn't walk away, what does this look like? How well do you do if you would have stayed and try to continue on your run? So I know that's the argument that we're going to hear by Saturday, what Lane Kiffin's decision is. I think it's going to continue to be delayed, and I think it's going to be delayed until after the overall playoffs. That's my personal thought. And then we'll figure out, and then we'll learn if Ole Miss is going to match what LSU is doing. Is he going to take LSU's offer? Is Florida going to try to sneak in a last-second offer? And maybe they're keeping it on the wraps and keeping it quiet to hopefully not be outbid and, kind of slide in there at the last second to secure that that's going to be their head coach. We'll see, and we'll find out. So it'll be interesting. I'm excited to see how this all ends up turning out overall. But nonetheless, though, I'm excited. But we are going to take a quick commercial break. We're going to play a song, Project Papa Crow, What About Us? And when we come back, hopefully I'll have an update as far as Mike goes. Maybe Mike will be able to join as far as the overall grading of the quarterback rooms for the AFC teams on the second part of that. We did the NFC teams a couple weeks ago. Now we're going to do the AFC teams and give them a grade. And so we will be right back.
pledge my allegiance to her. From sea to shining sea, she held her torch to the sky to give the world liberty. What about us? What about we? What about living the American dream? What about love? In God we trust. These are the things they want us all to believe. What about us? What about we, the people? What about us? What about we, the people? The people walk through the streets, holding up protest signs. Try not to repeat our history. Maybe no one will have to die. What about us? What about we? What about living the American dream? And what about hope? Trust God and let go. These are the phrases they want us to believe. What about us? What about we, the people? What about us? What about we, the people? And right now we need a hero, someone who will stand and fight for us. A leader, someone we all know, to wear the shield of America. Oh, what about we, the people? What about us? What about we, the people? What about us? What about us? What about the people? What about us? What about us? What about the people? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What about we, the people?
What about us? What about us? What about us? What about us?
There we go. All right. Welcome back in all to Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice. Big shout out to Project Papa Crow, What About Us, for their song. Back for the second part of the episode, where we talk about the quarterback evaluation in the quarterback room, giving them an overall grade. Part two on the AFC side, I did talk to Mike. Unfortunately, he thinks his computer might be cooked. He tried to turn it on, and all he's getting is hot air. It's not responding. He's not able to log in or anything. So I'm trying to see if Mike will join in via phone. But we will, we'll definitely find out for sure. And actually, I'm going to send Mike this phone number to see if he can use this to also call in. If it works. I don't know if it'll work or not, but we will try. I'm at least going to make the effort to try to get Mike in here, because Mike didn't always agree with my gradings for the quarterback rooms. But in the meantime, we'll go ahead and get started as I lose my mouse. There we go. My computer's been funky for a while, and I have no idea why. All right, so let's look at the quarterback rooms, though. there we go, for the AFC. All right, so for the AFC East, because we'll just start from the top and we'll work our way. We'll start from the top. We'll work our way down. So the AFC East. So the Bills at the current moment only have 2 quarterbacks on their roster. They've got Josh Allen. They've got Mitchell Trubisky. Dolphins have Tua Tagovailoa, Zach Wilson, and Quinn Ewers. Patriots have Drake May, Joshua Dobbs, Tommy DeVito. And then the Jets have Tyrod Taylor and Justin Fields. For the Bills, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to give the Bills an A for their quarterback room. I give them an A because of Josh Allen not only being last year's MVP, it's evident that he is probably the main focal point for the Bills' success and their driving success overall. And I say that because if you look at last year, once they traded away Stephon Diggs and they really didn't have a true number 1 quarterback, there wasn't a whole lot for them to work with, or, there was really no main target for him to throw to other than, Keon Coleman, other than, Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid. So for him to be able to make do with what he's got weapon-wise and still have an MVP season, still do what he's able to do, he does have the benefit of having James Cook in the backfield with him, as well as you have a proven veteran in Mitchell Trubisky, who has had success with Buffalo before, even had a little bit of success with Pittsburgh, had some success with Chicago when he first got drafted there, and now is backing up Josh. I'm going to give Buffalo an A. Miami with Tua, Zach Wilson, and Quinn Ewers. I watched Zach Wilson a lot with the Jets. I watched him a lot with I watched him a little bit with the Broncos. I don't think he's played hardly at all for the Dolphins so far, even with Tua being out. I'm honestly going to give the Dolphins, I'm going to give them a D. I feel like that's probably the best fit for them. And a lot of that's just due to the fact of Tua's hurt all the time. He almost always has a concussion or some type of health issues that keeps him from being able to be healthy, be on the field. Zach Wilson is honestly, he was a reach with the Jets overall to start with. And then Quinn is just kind of unproven. I watched Quinn a lot at Texas. I thought he was going to be a top draft pick. I thought he was going to go a lot higher than he ended up going as far as the 7th round and whatnot goes. But nonetheless, though, it was a little bit surprising. And then you have the Patriots. You've got Drake May. You've got Josh Dobbs. You got Tommy DeVito. I'm going to give the Patriots, I'm going to give them a B. And appreciate you into the weeds. So it's Amber and Laura. So if y'all like anything spooky, paranormal, or any type of like people, like the tea on people as far as like celebrities and kind of hot water and whatnot, that's the podcast to check out. Because if you're like me, I love the tea. I don't really like being the tea, but I like knowing the tea and just knowing what's going on and whatnot. Joel, good sir, I think I'm good. It's nothing on your end. It's just my I have like a multi USB port that gets plugged in and it's being weird. I don't know why. I'm barely touching it and moving it, and it's just apparently sensitive enough that it gets very upset about that for whatever reason. Don't know why, but it does. But Patriots quarterback situation, I'm gonna give them a B just because of Drake May. He's absolutely, made leaps and bounds his second year. Having Josh McDaniels as your offensive coordinator helps that tremendously. Josh Dobbs, a little bit of a journeyman. I know he had a little bit of that run there with the Vikings. He's been on the Niners, been on the Titans, been just about everywhere. And then Tommy DeVito, the good Italian boy from Jersey, Tommy Cutlets. Great story, cool dude, funny, entertaining more than anything when he was with the Giants. Not really super worried about the Patriots, though. If Drake May goes down, neither one of those guys really says they can keep the ship floating while they're gone. I don't see it personally. And then the Jets have Tyrod Taylor and they have Justin Fields. To be honest, I'm gonna give them an F. I like Justin Fields. I know Mike was a big Justin Fields fan when he got drafted to Chicago. I watched Justin Fields his entire time at Ohio State. I thought he was a first-round pick quarterback. I think for Justin, he just never got set up for success as far as having a good, solid offensive line, good, solid foundation. The coaching staff in Chicago was not great. I don't feel like they really cultured and grew a lot of positivity for him, unfortunately, with that. So I think there's just a lot of demons that come with that. I think it was better in Pittsburgh. He took him to 4-2. And then they decided to go with Russ, which to me, not the greatest move for them to make, but that's just me. And then Tyrod, great journeyman, great guy. I think even for being the Jets and what the Jets have, he's serviceable, but even Tyrod can't save the Jets basically from themselves, which is not saying a whole lot, to be honest with you. And then we have the AFC North, what was, I thought, going to be probably the toughest division in all of NFL football. And it's kind of been the most disappointing, to be 100% honest with you. So the Ravens have Lamar Jackson, Tyler Huntley, Cooper Rush. I'm going to give the Ravens a B. Lamar, obviously a previous MVP. He's carrying the room tremendously. Tyler Huntley ended up being a little bit more serviceable and actually doing better than Cooper Rush did in Baltimore with that unit. And I think a lot of that, too, is Cooper Rush was kind of spoiled with Dallas. Dallas almost always has pretty top-tier talent as far as wide receiver, as far as offensive line goes and whatnot. So he had kind of the benefit of having a lot of top guys still continue to make him look good. He just had to get them the football. So it was rare for him to truly have to struggle. And with a Baltimore Ravens team that they don't truly have that guy other than Zay Flowers of who's really the main target guy that we can throw to. Now, yes, they have Mark Andrews. He's old reliable. But the depth of that talent and the options that are out there are just not there for Baltimore that they were in Dallas. So I'm going to give Baltimore a B. Cincinnati. So there is rumor that Cincinnati will have Joe Burrow available this coming Thursday on Thanksgiving against the Ravens. Ironically enough, Lamar came back last week. There's potential that Joe Burrow comes back this week. But they have Joe Burrow, they have Joe Flacco, and they have Jake Browning. Mike might not agree with this. And when he goes back to read the clips, he probably might not. I'm going to give Cincinnati's quarterback room, I'm going to give them an A. I'd even give them like an A- or a B+. And I say that because you have Joe Burrow, who's proven. I think he's been able to make it work with what he's got. Now, a lot of people are going to make the argument you have, Jamar Chase, one of, if not the best wide receiver in the league, depending on, how you want to vote 1A, 1B, number 1, number 2, either or, between him and Justin Jefferson. For Joe Flacco to come in, have any remotely type of success that they've been able to have, they were able to beat the Steelers at one point. That ended up being a shootout in the quote-unquote Unk Bowl with Joe Flacco and Aaron Rodgers both being over 40 years old, duking it out, and Joe Flacco has a career day doing that. So they've had a lot of success with their quarterback room. Even Jake Browning last year, really good year. This year, not so much. He struggled this year, has continued to struggle this year. But I think between both Joe Flacco and Joe Burrow, I would give Cincinnati like A- B+ type of grade for them, just because of how successful both quarterbacks have been. Now, again, it's hard to not be successful when you have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Mike Gesicki and whatnot. But still, you do have to be able to get them the ball and be able to make the plays, which they have been. Now, albeit Cincinnati sitting in, I think, 3-7, 3-8, one of the two. Playoff hopes are extremely slim, but the potential is there. And in an AFC North where the Ravens were 1-5 and now they're leading the division at 6-5, the opportunity is still within reach. It's still possible. Then you have the Steelers. I'm going to say the Browns for last because the Browns have been the quarterback talk of everything. And I know Mike is probably going to be upset that he's not here to talk about this, but if anything, we can always talk about this next week too, Mike, if you want to. You have Aaron Rodgers, who is technically injured with a sprained wrist at the current moment. You have Mason Rudolph, and you have previous last year's national champion quarterback in Will Howard. As much as I don't want to give Aaron Rodgers his flowers, and I really, really don't, I'll give the Steelers quarterback room a B. And I'll say that because Aaron has had success with Pittsburgh, and truly the offense has not been that big of an issue with Pittsburgh. I was skeptical once they traded away George Pickens, because to me, that makes your offense that much more dangerous when you have a guy like DK on one side, you have George Pickens on the other, and George Pickens is having a career year in Dallas right now with the plays he's been able to make and whatnot. It'll be interesting to see if Dallas is financially able to sign him to a long term and keep him with everybody else that they're paying to boot. But considering the fact that Aaron has had a pretty solid year so far with the Steelers, Mason Rudolph back and forth with Pittsburgh as far as being on the team, leaving, being back on the team is extremely serviceable. Now, Will Howard, don't know what he looks like as far as a professional level goes. Now, he was dressed and ready to go as the backup for Mason if something happens to him. But nonetheless, though, I'll give the Steelers about a B for their overall locker room grade. I feel like they're solid. It's not the Aaron of old, because then you could probably argue it's an A. But considering where he's at in his career, how well he's been able to do, I'm going to give Steelers a B. And then probably the talk of all off season, Mike is excited for this one. The Cleveland Browns. So as it stands right now, the only two quarterbacks that they officially have on the roster that are able to suit up and go, you have Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel. I'm going to give Cleveland a D as it stands right now. And I say that because we've seen a little bit of flashes from Dylan Gabriel. And again, it's another one of those situations. There's not a whole lot for these rookies to truly be successful with. You do have Jerry Jeudy. He had kind of we'll call it an oops moment with the Raiders game and just flat out losing the ball, getting it knocked out by the safety, and preventing a potential touchdown play. You've got two great running backs in Dylan Sampson and in Quentin Judkins. So, and you still have David Njoku, and you have a top 10 defense. You have like a top 5 defense even. So the offense is just really where a lot of the question marks are, because the wide receiver room is not very deep, not very good, and the quarterback play is a lot of questions. But Shedeur comes in his first start against the Raiders, makes a lot of pretty athletic throws, makes a lot of good decisions. Now makes a lot of kind of boneheaded decisions, but he's a rookie. He's playing against an NFL defense. He actually didn't even take first reps this week with the starters. So considering all of that, and he still managed to win them the game, first Cleveland Brown quarterback to do that since like 1999. That's pretty dang good. I'm still going to give him a D because, again, we have a very small sample size from both. I haven't really been wowed by both. I'm not going to sit here and, say that Shedeur is going to be the next guy, but he's well on his way to proving, hey, I should have been picked earlier, and people should have potentially taken a chance on me. And I'll give him credit. He is at least taking his opportunity. He's having fun with it. I know a lot of people are grilling him about kind of the cockiness and whatnot, and again, Mike is also going to love this. I would make the argument for Shedeur that while you say he's cocky, he's arrogant and whatnot, look at JJ McCarthy, quote unquote 9, and the dude has not been good. I know it's his first year truly starting because he was hurt all last year. It has not been a good product from what we've seen out of JJ McCarthy, especially for a first round top 10 pick expectation quarterback with Kevin O'Connell as your head coach, Justin Jefferson as a wide receiver, Jordan Addison as a wide receiver, and Aaron Jones as your running back, and TJ Hawkinson as tight end. Not a good start. Just saying. Real quick through the AFC South, we got CJ Stroud, Davis Mills, Graham Mertz. I'm probably going to give Houston, I'm going to give them about a B. And I say that mainly because CJ Stroud it seems like he's regressed a little bit since his rookie year. He's had some ups and downs. He's had some struggles. They've had a lot of injuries at wide receiver and whatnot. Davis Mills has come in and looked great. I mean, he's been there for a hot minute. He knows the system. He knows the players. So he's been serviceable. CJ's doing well. I mean, Houston has kind of been coming on the, up and coming again. They got a tough win against the Bills. So, and again, Graham Mertz, seen him in the preseason, wasn't a huge fan of him in college. But we'll have to just see what he does in the pros. So I'm going to give Houston a B. Indy with Daniel Jones and Leonard Riley, or Riley Leonard. I might get a little bit of hate for this for being from Indianapolis, living here and whatnot. I'm going to give the Colts a C. And I say that because we've seen what happens when you shut down Jonathan Taylor. Daniel Jones goes back to being New York Giants Danny Dimes, and it is not a good sight to see. When you shut down Jonathan Taylor, you shut down all the Colts offense, and Daniel Jones struggles. Riley Leonard, he's a rookie, took Notre Dame to the national title game. Don't know how he looks like in the pros so far because we haven't had a chance to see him play, but not overly impressed with the Colts quarterback room. As a whole, obviously, Anthony Richardson is there, but he is hurt, so he's not technically listed on here. And even if he was, I'm still going to give the Colts a C. Jags, Trevor Lawrence and Nick Mullins. Honestly, I'm probably going to give them about a D. A very underwhelming time from Trevor Lawrence. Now, I know his first year he had Urban Meyer, wasn't great. Then he had Doug Peterson, started to look like he had a lot of growth. They need to get some weapons around him and some pieces. They have, and again, it's a lot of inconsistencies, and especially now with Liam Cohen, it's like, okay, you can thump the Chargers with no problems, but then you struggle heartedly with Jacoby Brissett and the Cardinals, and it's not a good look, and it's kind of concerning, to be 100% honest with you. And then Titans have Cam Ward, Brandon Allen. Because it's a first-round quarterback, because, again, he does not have a whole lot of help, I'm going to give the Titans a D. I think the potential for them to be better is there. Seeing Brandon Allen play for years, not super impressed. And considering the lack of talent that Cam Ward and lack of support Cam Ward has for what he's been able to do, I'm going to give him a D. But, again, I can't really give him much higher than that. The Broncos with Bo Nix, Jarrett Stidham, I'm going to give them a B just because of how well Bo Nix has played in Sean Payton's system. Denver has a lot of talent too, which makes it a little bit easier for him and a great defense. So I'm going to give Denver a B. Kansas City, Patrick Mahomes, Gardner Minshew, I would give them an A. I'm not going to say A+ or anything like that. Patrick Mahomes has the experience. We know what he can do. Gardner Minshew has experience as well, is very much serviceable and can fill in. He's filled in just about everywhere. So I'm not really too worried about KC's. I think an A is pretty fair for them. And I think if I gave them anything less than that, I would probably get verbally destroyed on social media if I gave them anything less than an A, honestly, unless they're not Chiefs fans, and then I'd probably be okay. The Raiders, Geno Smith, Kenny Pickett, Aiden O'Connell. Honestly, I'm going to say a D. Geno Smith has had a terrible year with the Raiders. Again, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Maybe it looks different without Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator. Overall, not great. Kenny Pickett, haven't seen him play for the Raiders. What we saw in Pittsburgh and whatnot, yeah. Aiden O'Connell had basically a full year. I think he was hurt, kind of come back. Again, nothing crazy, nothing that really makes me say, oh, look at that. Yeah, the Raiders are a D for me. And then Chargers have Justin Herbert, Trey Lance. Again, Herbert's really carrying this. I'm going to give them a B because of what they have. Again, Trey Lance, if Harbaugh can do kind of the quarterback whisperer thing and really tap the potential that is Trey Lance, I would potentially rate higher, but as it stands right now, I can't really see anything other than that because it's just two guys. One of them is obviously the star, and one of them needs a little bit of work. But nonetheless, though, appreciate everybody tuning in. Please check out all the other great hosts here on MBR, Military Broadcast Radio. They are absolutely fantastic. Check them out at mbradio.us. Hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving, if that's what you choose to celebrate and whatnot. Nonetheless, hope everybody has a great holiday off. Hope everybody has a great time with friends and family. And we will see y'all next week.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio.